Hi everyone, Dr. Suneel Dhand, internal medicine physician. Welcome to another video. I've talked an awful lot about how the medical establishment does not give people good advice. I probably sound like a broken record on this, but for good reason. Because for a variety of conditions, whether we're talking about type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, many other illnesses, as soon as you are diagnosed with an illness, you are basically set up to be sucked into the medical industrial complex with no hope of ever getting out of it, when most of the time, or a lot of the time, simple lifestyle changes will work to reverse many illnesses out there. And this is not emphasized enough by the medical establishment that is so focused on getting people on their pills and their injections. Of course, it's up to any individual whether they want to follow some good, sensible advice. Some people will, some people won't, but it doesn't help when you have a medical establishment that is basically setting people up for a lifetime of medications. And nowhere is this more true than in the field of type 2 diabetes. People who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes are given some pretty terrible information by most authorities out there, whether you're in the United States or United Kingdom. In fact, I liken this to a famous story from politics that led to the demise of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. One of her ministers, I forget his name, made a famous speech where he stood up in the Houses of Parliament and he said that working for Margaret Thatcher was like playing cricket. Americans, I know how much you like cricket, but he said it is like playing cricket and realizing that when you go out to bat and you get to the middle, you get ready to face the bowler, you look down and you realize that the captain of your team has broken your cricket bat. I am sure that for Americans, you can imagine that same story with baseball. What chance do you have if your captain is working against you from the very beginning? And I liken this to the medical establishment right now, which is full of some terrible advice. And I'm going to share a pretty incredible story with you of a very close relative of mine in the United Kingdom who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Fortunately, she's sensible. She listens to her relative on how to sensibly reverse this illness, and her HbA1c is coming down. But she shared with me a leaflet from the National Health Service. And this could equally happen in the United States because the authorities have no clue about type 2 diabetes and how to sensibly reverse it. Ironically, 100 years ago or at any time in history, if you got type 2 diabetes, which is basically a lifestyle disease, you would have been given much better advice than you get over the last couple of decades. So I'm going to share this with you. So look at this here. This is a leaflet here from the NHS saying your diabetes results. And it's talking about controlling your HbA1c, which is a marker of poor blood glucose control over a period of about 3 months or so. I prefer other tests like HOMA-IR, but I've talked about that before. But anyway, the most familiar test is HbA1c. And this leaflet lists some strategies here about how you can reduce your HbA1c if it is elevated in a pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic range. Take a look at this here. What have they listed first? Taking or adjusting insulin. Think about that. That is the first thing they say to a type 2 diabetic. Adjust your insulin to better control your HbA1c. What do they say after that? Taking medication. Yes, taking medication, because that's the way the medical profession is geared up right now. That's their whole paradigm. You have a problem, here's a pill or an injection. We'll never get to the root cause. So those are the first two things that they are telling a type 2 diabetic with elevated HbA1c. Then they say, be more active. Okay, fair enough. Be more active. I think that is fairly good advice there. I don't know why it wasn't first or second. After that, eating smaller portions. Okay, I do agree with that. Right now in the Western world, people eat way too much. And at the end of the day, no matter how you put it, if you are consuming more calories than you burn, you are going to tend to put on weight and gain excess body fat. Of course, it's more complicated than that, including avoiding processed foods, which, by the way, is not mentioned here. But they do say eat smaller portions, then they say lose some weight. Well, that's good advice, but I always think that telling somebody who is overweight or obese to lose weight is like telling someone who is homeless to go get a job, go get a house. That's not very good advice. It has to be more detailed than that. Okay, what comes next? Now, this is the clincher here. Of course, they have to say this. Eating less fat, especially saturated fat. They are obsessed. Authorities nowadays are absolutely obsessed with saturated fat and salt, which they don't mention here, but they are very keen on reducing saturated fat intake. Now, of course, too much of anything isn't good, but saturated fat, as well as protein, if you look at charts of what elevates people's intrinsic insulin levels. Proteins and natural fats increase insulin levels much less than carbohydrates and sugars. And of course, type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, they are illnesses of having too much insulin in the body. People become insulin resistant. So it's astonishing to me that they would list that here before they list any other type of food. Eat less fat. How utterly ridiculous and emblematic of the clown world that we have right now with medical establishment advice to people who have insulin resistance. Focus on a nutrient which doesn't even increase your insulin levels by that much. Okay, finally, look at this. Last point right here. Have less sugar. Of course, type 2 diabetes is predominantly a disease. Well, it is a disease where your sugar levels go up, and it has been known for thousands of years. Look at ancient texts from ancient civilizations, and they called diabetes the sugar disease. And nowadays, with how advanced and how supposedly scientific we are, we've got into a position where we tell a type 2 diabetic, last thing on the list is to have less sugar. When having less carbs and sugar, the compounds which spike people's insulin levels and then lead to pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes is last on the list. Almost an afterthought. Hey, cut back on sugar and carbs. That is a level of complete clownery we have right now with understanding of type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes, a disease of insulin resistance. And predominantly now in Western countries, most people who have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, they have it because they pummel their bodies every day with way too many carbs, way too many sugars, way too many ultra-processed foods which are high in those carbs and sugars. Of course, other compounds come into it as well. But I'm not saying that eating vast amounts of fats is a good idea, but why focus on fats way above sugars, which most medical authorities do right now? There are tribes in remote parts of the world which basically eat nothing apart from saturated fats. They are very primitive. And you do blood tests on them, and yes, their cholesterol levels may be elevated, but they won't have any heart disease. Because most of the time in Western countries, when people have insulin resistance, there is a process called de novo lipogenesis occurring, which is converting those excess carbs and sugars into fat molecules. And insulin, of course, is a fat storage hormone. So for most people out there, sensibly restricting carbs and sugars should be the first bit of advice, because it will lead in most people to significantly reducing insulin resistance and also losing fat in a relatively short amount of time. We're talking only a few weeks. Okay, let's delve into this leaflet a bit more because there's more here as well. So interestingly, on the second page, they've got loads of these bubbles here with advice for type 2 diabetics. You can help reduce your blood pressure by, and then they list a whole load of things. Having less alcohol, having less salt, taking medication, being more active, eating fruit and veg, losing weight. But again, in most people out there, insulin resistance is the big driver of elevated blood pressure readings. So again, nothing about carbs and sugars there. Then we've got, how do you reduce your cholesterol? Again, insulin resistance is usually the root cause. They've listed lots of things. Eat less fat, again, number one, to reduce your cholesterol, when actually eating fewer carbs and sugars should be number one for most people out there. Then they've got eating smaller portions, eating oily fish, eating more fruits and vegetables, taking medications. Taking medications, of course, is number two. That's what we expect from the medical profession these days. Then they talk about stopping smoking. Okay, that's a very valid thing. Then you can help lower your weight by doing all of these things. They list being more active as number one. Fair enough, but actually anybody who's actually successfully lost weight will tell you that to lose weight, diet is probably 80% plus, and activity the rest of the time. Most of your weight loss occurs according to what you put on your plate. Having less alcohol, attending support sessions, fair enough. Having less sugar, okay, at least they did mention that, but number 4 here. Eating smaller portions, eating less fat, taking medication. No word again about the majority of people pummeling themselves with way too many carbs, which are also high in calories. So this is the type of advice you get in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, a supposedly advanced country with one of the main diseases which is causing so many associated comorbidities. And the United States is at the same level, maybe even slightly worse, in terms of complete ignorance as to how people can successfully reverse their insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes in a matter of weeks, if they want to do that. And again, some people might follow through with the advice, other people won't, but it doesn't help when you have a medical establishment that isn't even giving good advice in the first place. So that's all I've got to say about that. I'm absolutely appalled that my relative was given these pieces of advice by the National Health Service of the United Kingdom. Thankfully, they are sensible and they listen to me, they watch my videos, and her HbA1c is on the way down with some advice that I've given regarding sensibly restricting carbohydrates, sugars, being more active. This person is walking more, working on other things in her life, including stress and sleep, and also some intermittent fasting. But it's up to everybody out there who has a diagnosis of prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Your future is in your hands. You can either listen to bad medical establishment advice, or you can do research, and above all else, something which sounds common sense to you. What I'm talking about here is not rocket science. Doctors knew it a few decades ago, before our entire profession got overtaken by complete and utter lunacy and a narrative that is driven by big pharma. And for anyone out there who's interested in some more detailed advice on naturally and holistically losing body fat and reversing dangerous insulin resistance, I have created a blueprint course, the MetThrive Method, which includes a guide and some more instructional videos from me. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out in the link down below. Other things down below in the description, including my website and the other work I do. Hit the like button if you like this video and the subscribe button for more similar videos in the future. We will speak again very soon.